Businesses across sectors are bracing for what could be a volatile election day lasting beyond November 3rd. A new memo from Tusk Holdings outlines the main scenarios companies should consider, specifically those in Silicon Valley. Joining us now is Bradley Tusk, founder and CEO of Tusk Holdings. Bradley, great to have you with us on the show. Take us through what the companies in your portfolio need to keep in mind heading into next week. What are the main things?
Yeah, so a couple things. So one is if you're a big tech company, which is not in our venture portfolio, but if you're Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, any of those companies, a few potential things are heading your way. If the Senate flips and if the polls hold and Biden does win the White House, I think you're looking at one significant antitrust regulation coming at you. The Justice Department has already filed suit against Google. Facebook may not be far behind. And I think the odds of there being significant new legislation coming out of a Democratic Congress to limit how big companies can get is very likely. Number two, privacy. So Europe has privacy regulations called GDPR. California recently enacted their own privacy regulatory framework. Democrats in Congress have wanted to do this for a while. And I think, again, if you have a Democratic House and Senate, it's highly likely that some version of this moves through. Third would be Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. That is the section that says that Google or Facebook, Twitter, any platform can't be sued for the content posted by its users. That's what protects them from effectively all kinds of liability. If that went away, it changes their business model completely. Both sides of the aisle, there's support for this. Both Biden and Trump actually support repealing Section 230. And I think in the Senate, given some of their recent outrage towards Facebook and Twitter, it may even mean bipartisan support for it. Fourth will be worker classification. So if you are Uber or DoorDash or Lyft or any of the sharing economy companies, there you have a measure on the ballot in California on Tuesday called Prop 22. And that measure says that if it succeeds, all drivers, all delivery people, everyone in the sharing economy are independent contractors, not full-time employees. The difference here is probably about 20% in added operating costs for sharing economy companies if everyone who works in their platform are employees, not contractors. Should Prop 22 fail, meaning should the full-time employee status win instead, it's likely that we'll see a version of that coming out of Washington on a nationalized level, as well as in blue states like New York, Illinois,
Bradley,
Jersey, other. So, yeah.
I do want to get into some specifics on some of those points you laid out. On Section 230, first and foremost, you mentioned there is support from both the Trump side and the Biden side on adjusting Section 230 in some ways. Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, had made this argument that if you change Section 230, that's actually bad for the startups. That's bad for Silicon Valley. You'll just end up with these big tech players who grew while they were protected. Do you think that is the case? And should smaller Silicon Valley companies be worried?
Yeah, not necessarily, because I think, right now, at least in the social media space, there's not a lot of competition, right? So Facebook, Twitter, and a few other companies hold the vast majority of the power and market share there. So, to say that seed Series A companies, the kind of companies I invested in my venture fund, are right now in a better place than they would be if there were more regulation on Facebook and Twitter, to me is pretty disingenuous, and it's what you would expect out of a CEO who wants to protect what he has.
And on Prop 22, you mentioned that as a critical bill to look out for in California. If it is voted yes, Proposition 22, what does this mean for regulation around these gig economy companies across the United States beyond California and their business models and impact ultimately to those consumers?
Yeah, so let's say I'm here in New York, you are. If you live in New York, and if a version of that were to come here, which is pretty likely, at least the attempt is very likely, it would mean if you're an Uber customer, higher costs for rides, longer wait times. It would mean the drivers are now employees. So on one hand, that would mean things like health benefits. On the other hand, they would lose all the flexibility that they have right now. They couldn't drive from more than one platform, so they could only drive for Uber or for Lyft. So it'd be a major change in the way that the drivers and delivery people operate, a major change in the business model of the sharing economy companies, and for consumers probably means higher costs and longer wait times.
Bradley, one thing that stood out to me in your scenarios is you said if Trump wins, states and cities are going to look to increase taxes and other revenue-raising ideas to compensate for the lack of federal aid. So that includes marijuana legalization or pushing efforts related to that, and sports betting. So what do you foresee in those spaces specifically for marijuana and sports betting?
Yeah, I think both of them are going to be legalized in a lot of states in the coming year. In fact, I think that's going to happen whether Trump or Biden wins. If Trump wins, it'll be even tougher for states and cities because any kind of federal bailout likely won't happen, and they'll need to do whatever they can to generate revenue. But even if there is a federal bailout, they're still going to be very, very desperate for cash, which means that they're going to approve new sources of revenue. So I think you'll start to see people, you can bet on your phone for sports. You can buy marijuana. We even recently saw Ann Arbor, Michigan decriminalize psychedelic drugs, and that could be the next stage on the horizon. So anything that has tax revenue to offer is all of a sudden going to be very welcome by cities and states.
And if the outcome of the election is undecided for days, for weeks, for months, what will be the thing that Silicon Valley companies have to look out for?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. One is just a lot of chaos, right? There's going to be chaos potentially on their platforms, a lot of discontent and dissent from their employees. Depending on how the ultimate outcome comes around, if it's decided by the courts, you're going to have a lot of their users are going to want to express their frustration. And if the process is really messy, it wouldn't be shocking to see an Iran or a China or a Russia try to jump in and play around with the platforms and disinformation to make it even messier. So it's going to be, for everyone in this country across all sectors, a really uncertain and difficult time if we don't know who wins the election. But the bigger you are and the more of society you control, and Silicon Valley controls quite a bit of it, the harder it's going to be.
All right, Bradley, thank you so much for your time and insight. That's Bradley Tusk, founder and CEO of Tusk Holdings. Thanks again.